Luke. I represent District 6 on the Salt Lake City Council. So thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know for those of you who have kids in school that there's no school tomorrow, so a lot of people are leaving for the long weekend early, but I really appreciate you being here. This is a really important issue for all of us. In District 6, which covers, as you know, the East Bench of Salt Lake City, we live in a wonderful part of the city. We live in a wonderful city. Our neighborhoods are nice, we're safe, and things are good. But it's concerning, and we can hear about statistics, I can stand up and talk about statistics and saying, well, there are things that are better and things that are worse, but things are good, but when we start feeling nervous, if we feel like things are getting a little bit worse when we hear from our neighbors, if there's a break-in or if our cars are broken into, there are things that are concerning. So over the past couple of years, I've noticed more and more, as I've gone and visited with different community councils, that I've been hearing more complaints about response times when people do call the police department. I've been hearing about more crime in general. Fortunately, most of that crime, tends to be, of the lesser offenses, which I know it can sound very offensive if your car's broken into and someone tells you it's a lesser offense. But, when you look at other parts of the city, the issues that we're dealing with are much better. But I think that things can be even better than they are. I know that there are a lot of questions tonight. I'm not going to talk a lot tonight. I'm going to turn the time over right now to Chief Burbank with the Salt Lake City Police Department to talk a little bit about what some of the crime prevention techniques are and policing in Salt Lake City and on the East Bench in general. But this meeting is for you. It's for you to ask the chief questions, to ask me questions related to crime prevention in our neighborhoods and related to policing in general. I want to go on record right now that I am a very strong supporter of the Salt Lake City Police Department. I think that our police officers are by far the best trained in the state of Utah. When you look at some of the horrific events that are taking place around the country, we don't see that in Salt Lake City, and I think that that's a testament to the types of individuals that we have working on our police force. So thank you. So this time I'm going to turn the mic over to Chief Burbank, and then if you have questions, what I'd like to do, just so that we can fit as many questions in as possible, if you could move up to the first couple of rows here, that way we can just go down the rows and ask questions, and we're not wasting a lot of time with people standing in line and making their way to the microphone. So again, thank you very much. Chief Burbank.
Thank you. Let me start by saying that I also live in this district, so I am very heavily invested in what goes on here. I think the big question on everyone's mind is how do we respond, right? What does the police department look like? And this is a problem that's been for the council. Those of you who watch Channel 17, I don't know if there's 2 of you in the room, but it's been an ongoing debate. And I think it's very important that we kind of describe what it looks like. And then I am happy to answer questions about anything. Right? There is nothing out of bounds with me, and so whatever you have a discussion about, I'm wandering over here towards the piano because I used this in another meeting I was at and it went over fairly well. So we'll say the piano is Salt Lake City. Now, do we have more officers on the west side of town or on the east side of town in Salt Lake City? Anyone want to venture a guess? Why do we have more officers on the west side? So he says there's a lot more going on, so we have more officers over there. Anyone want to say that we have more officers on the east side of town? Why do we have more officers on the east side of town?
Anything east of Highway 15, you have downtown and a lot more crime.
Okay, some pretty logical things. And it's an interesting debate that always takes on whenever I go talk to anyone. When I go talk to individuals on the west side, they tell me that you all have more police officers because all the money's up here and that's who gets the attention. Now, when I come up here and talk, and they always say, no, it's on the west side, because that's where all the problems are, so you spend all your time there. But actually, what we have always tried to do, and this is not innovative by any means, it's been going on in policing for a long time. So if this piano is Salt Lake City, we divide it up into areas of the city to divide it up equally based on the number of calls that we have coming into the police department from that area. So as you can imagine, if we say the downtown area is right here in the middle, right? We don't necessarily put more officers in one single location. What we do is we make their areas of responsibility a little smaller. By doing that, yes, you have more officers in that area. But what we try and do is assign officers into every area of the city, right, so that they have, in essence, their responsibility that they care for. Now, if there's fewer calls for service, right, the officers have a larger area that they are responsible for. And we constantly in Salt Lake City, because of the nature of our business, shuffle officers all around the city, just depending on what the call volume is that night. And I know some of you have called the police and have been put way back in line that you don't get an officer right away. And I think the other important thing is, so we have officers assigned everywhere in the city. They work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's 3 shifts that we work, so a day shift, an afternoon, and a graveyard shift. And we divide, again, the officers up based on the volume of calls. Obviously, at 4 a.m., we don't have as many calls as we do at, say, 4 in the afternoon. So we're going to staff heavier. Sorry, am I causing this problem? Thanks. Oh, all right. So we have more officers during that time, hopefully to deal with the problem so that we get to things in a timely fashion. We have a standard by which we want to get to priority 1 calls for service. So these are calls that involve people, right? So in progress sort of crimes, right? Especially persons crimes. We want to get to those calls within 6 minutes. We just recently did a study of all our calls. We get to them just a little over 5 minutes, which is pretty good time. I mean, well, I'll throw that up against anyone else in the state or in the nation. That is a pretty good time. Now, that, again, you can be on both spectrums of that. Because there are times you may call the police and the officer is driving by and goes, oh, here I am. And we have almost instantaneous response. There's other times where you call the police and the officers are driving from a distance in order to get there, just depending on what the calls for service are. So as calls come in, the #1 priority calls for service are those calls where people need immediate help, right? They move to the top. And they constantly move to the top if they continue to come in. So if you have an investigation, so if your car has been broken into, there is nobody there currently, that is going to drop down the list if we have more calls for service coming in which people need help or the immediate assistance. And so there are times that may hold for an hour, may hold for 2 hours, quite honestly. Right? Just depending on what the volume is coming in that evening or that day. But the one thing that I will guarantee and why we track what our big statistic that we are concerned about is how are we getting to those calls that people need immediate assistance now. And so you, as a citizen, sacrifice a little bit of your time, right? And it's annoying. Trust me, I'm with you on this 100%. If you call and say, hey, somebody just stole my car, and I want to talk to a cop about it. I do not blame you, and I apologize that your car was taken, because I have an expectation of living in a community in which I can eliminate crime. Now, that's not a very realistic expectation, but that is the standard, in essence, that I put police officers out. Our goal is to eliminate crime, not to document them after the fact and say, here's how many calls we had. I would much prefer to say, this is how many calls we didn't have, and take care of business that way. But unfortunately, in the society that we live, we have crime and disorder that occurs. But what I do guarantee, right, if you wait for your car problem to be handled because officers are handling another type of call in which somebody needs help, when you need help, those same people who have crimes that are not demanding immediate attention are going to wait for you. So, having said that, what is the right number of police officers to have? And this is a raging debate. In fact, how many of you read the paper today? right? Police chief doesn't want any more police. I'll take police officers all day long, right? Police officers cost about $100,000 a year annually for one police officer. So you do the math. I mean, we are expensive. There's no question about it when you look at all that I get to wear and cars and all those other things. It's very expensive. In fact, a police officer costs the citizens about $90 an hour in order to pay for their gas, their training, and everything else that goes into it. So we are an extremely expensive service. And so on those things that should not have a police officer there, and I talked a little about this in the council meeting the other night, things that should be handled maybe by social workers, maybe by other resources or anything else, we want to defer them there. Because no knock on any of these people, but they are much less expensive than a police officer. And so the more people that we can defer into those areas or refer into those avenues, the more effective and efficient we're going to be. And so that's what we always try and do with the number of police officers. But there again, what is that right number? So for Salt Lake City, right, the national average that was held for years and years, and this was through the International Association of Chiefs of Police who came up with this standard, that you should have 2.5 officers per 1,000 resident population. So Salt Lake City has about 450 police officers that work for us. If you look at the resident population of Salt Lake City, that gives us about 2.25 officers per 1,000. You look at that national standard and you say, hey, that's pretty good. Right? We're almost right where we need to be. A little comparison, New York City has 8 per 1,000. New York City has 35,000 police officers that work in New York City. It's an amazing number. They are the highest. Cities like Los Angeles are somewhere around 2.6, 2.7. So you can kind of see where the average lies. Other cities in the state of Utah probably drop down below 2, but hover around there. Now, the trick with Salt Lake City or any major metropolitan area is every single day, our population swells to almost double. And when you compare the number of police officers we have to the number of people who come into the city every single day, right, we have 1.3 officers per 1,000. Now you say, okay, what does all this mean, right? Because, yeah, I can talk, right? And we can throw out statistics and everything else. But for perspective, 50% of the criminals that we arrest do not live in Salt Lake City. And I like that. Quite frankly, I don't want the criminals living in my neighborhood or in my city if I'm the police chief. I'd rather they live somewhere else. But the most interesting statistic, and one that we should always be aware of and cognizant of, 50% of the victims of crime that report things to the Salt Lake City Police Department are not residents of our city. So, I mean, we have a tremendous burden. Now you look, all the homeless services, where do they reside? In downtown Salt Lake City. So when you look at Sandy police officers bring homeless individuals into downtown Salt Lake in order to receive the services that exist in Salt Lake City. Now, I can't say that that's a bad thing, because if someone needs services and the services are over here, you want to get them to the services, right? I mean, it only makes sense. But we then need to, as the city, as the capital city, say, okay, how are we recouping some of that? Right? What are we doing to offset the time and energy that we spend with these individuals? Imagine all the property that exists in Salt Lake City owned by the LDS Church, who contributes greatly. I'm not pointing fingers at the church, but they're not paying property taxes. All the state entities that exist in Salt Lake City are not paying the city property taxes that go, right? We are funded almost exclusively through your property taxes and sales tax. You have all the federal entities that exist in Salt Lake City that aren't paying into that. You have all the nonprofit organizations that are not necessarily paying taxes at the same rate as other people. And so we have a lot of people that live, work, and play in Salt Lake City that are not necessarily contributing to the well-being of Salt Lake City. Now, it's a limited resource, right? Nobody knows this better than Charlie, right? There's only so much money in the budget. The police department is about 1/4 of the entire city budget is the police department budget. So this year, the budget is $60 million, the highest that it has ever been in the history of Salt Lake City. I have more police officers than ever in the history of Salt Lake City. Crime is the lowest it's been in 28 years in Salt Lake City. The calls for service in Salt Lake City are down dramatically. In fact, are probably at a 25-year low as well. Now, does that make you satisfied if you happen to be the victim of crime? All right? Trust me on this one. I do relate specifically to this. Because if you live in your home for 10 years and nothing ever happens to you, right? Nothing happens on your street. You walk by, wave at the hi, Bob, how are you today? Everything's good, right? And then the day someone burglarizes your home while you're away and down the street someone else gets it, when someone asks you, do you have a crime problem? Yes, I do, right? And it's a significant one because it's impacting me. Now, I realize we're not all that selfish, but it is a problem, right? Because now all of a sudden it is impacting how I live, how I work, and my neighbors. And so, yes, I do have a problem. And so for me to come in here and tell you that, well, you have a problem today, but they don't have a problem, so things are okay. Well, no, that's not right. But again, how do we balance this? And I will always contend it's not about having a police officer standing on every street corner. Because right now, this room is pretty safe. And not that I'm a big worker, but I have some of my officers running around here. Right? So nothing necessarily is going to happen in front of the police officer. But next door it may, right? Down the street it may. This is the security balance that we live with. Is it feasible to say, okay, we're going to put an officer on every corner? No, it's not. Right? Well, what is that ratio? How do we get to that point? And so we're trying to move towards a 60% volume of work for our police officers. That 60% of their time is occupied dealing with things. Answering calls, going to lunch, getting in the car, getting gas, everything that goes on in a police officer. I mean, we have to factor this in. I mean, you kind of chuckle, but I mean, you know, they work a 10-hour shift. They're entitled to take a lunch during that 10-hour shift. So we factor all that into what's busy. And then what we want is 40% of their time where they can do proactive work and potentially prevent the crime that we're talking about. And so that's the balancing act that we're playing right now. So with that, let me answer questions, because I can, please, sir.
I live in Oak Hills, up above Hogle Zoo. For the last 3 months, we've had increased burglaries in our neighborhood. My neighborhood and the neighborhood immediately to the south, Devonshire, Wilton, Canterbury. We saw this trend. I know that people have come in from outside of Salt Lake and that they're targeting my neighborhood and the neighborhoods east of Foothill. If I know that, you know that. But yet we don't have any increased patrol coverage in our neighborhood. The burglaries in my neighborhood have been so frequent that they could be mapped with pins on a map to show what's going on. We have cops sitting at stop signs giving tickets. And when they stop us, they always say, we're here because the neighbors have complained about speeding in your neighborhood. So apparently when we complain about speeding, we get increased cop coverage. But when we have burglaries and there's a trend, and you know that people have moved in and they're going to burglarize for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then they move out. But you can see that happening. Why can't we get increased patrol coverage? Because it makes a difference to these guys who are burglarizing between 8 and noon every day to see a cop driving through the neighborhood. I can tell you that I've lived in my neighborhood for 22 years, and I've seen a cop patrolling my neighborhood once in 22 years. My wife is home all day. She walks our neighborhood all day long. She never sees a patrol patrolling my neighborhood. Why can't we get increased coverage when you see these burglary trends in our neighborhoods?
Okay, so my question for you is, and I will not be argumentative, but I will point some things out. How do you know you haven't had increased?
Patrol coverage? Because we can't see it. My neighbors sit around and try and figure out how to raise money to hire off-duty cops.
Well, so you have had increased presence. In fact, we've done operations with our burglary unit in order to specifically target those people and catch some of them.
Why aren't we seeing them?
Doing that? Well, I don't know, because I see them, and I will tell you what, I drive through your neighborhood 3 times every single day, at least, because I happen to live there.
Well, stop and say hi.
I absolutely will if I see you on the street. So, I mean, what I'm trying to tell, and again, I'm not trying to blow this gentleman off at all, because I have that same concern. Because I get up in the morning and I leave to go to work. Right? And I worry what's going to happen to my house if there's problems. And so, it is not... We absolutely pay attention to this. So you understand, we do flex resources all the time to cover things. It is extremely difficult for us to intercede on some of these crimes. It is very difficult because they happen as quickly as I walk down the street and I look to see who's not home and who's home, right? I go around the corner and I wait, and then I come and go in the back door because I saw you leave. In fact, again, I don't recommend being paranoid. I sometimes leave my house, drive around the block, and come back just to see. Now, again, I'm not recommending, again, you're dealing with a different entity when you talk about me. But those are some of the concerns that I have. They happen very quickly.
Why don't we ask everybody, if you've seen patrol coverage in your neighborhood in the last 12 months, raise your hand.
Okay, so there's quite a few that have seen it.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, again, the challenge is because I'm on your side, right? I truly am. And it's never my intention not to provide adequate police service to your area. Right? There has been a false perception that what we've done downtown to address some of the downtown problems has taken people out of the areas in which they work. In fact, that is just the opposite. What we did is we said, all right, we have so many people working in the city, and as I said before, the downtown has a lot of stuff going on. So there's always been more police officers in the downtown area. We just took those officers and said, you're no longer going to work for several different commands, right? Because the motorcycle officers work for a particular deputy chief. The patrol officers work for a different deputy chief. The detectives work for... What we did is we unified them. And we said, you're now going, in an experiment, right? You're now going to answer to one deputy chief, and he's standing here somewhere. He's bald in the back. But it's a prerequisite, trust me. And we said, all right, we're going to see what we can do in order to impact this area. But we didn't take resources from anywhere else. With the idea being, because downtown has always pulled our resources. Always. Right? The nightclubs, everything else that goes on downtown in a good, healthy environment draws police services. But what we tried to do is say, okay, so we're now going to unify you all under one command, right? So that we don't pull people from the neighborhood so that they have more proactive time to do some things.
Sir, thank you very much for your question. I do appreciate that, and that I do hear. I mean, I hear that a lot from, you know, as I said before, at different community council meetings. There is definitely a perception, and so one of the things that I think we're going to have to figure out, and this is something that, you know, I'm committed to working with the chief on and working with the department, is figuring out, you know, what we can do to increase that presence, because the work is being done. I mean, I think that, you know, as Chief Burbank said, I mean, you know, crimes are being, you do have police showing up, and a lot of people do see them, but I think that there are some things that can be done to increase that perception. So thank you for bringing that up. Next question. Ma'am, here,
Here, borrow mine.
I've listened to Charlie and you, and I appreciate everything that's been done, but I have to echo what the gentleman just mentioned, because I live in that area. And what I'd like to know is what concrete steps can be taken to, one, possibly increase the staffing of the police so that there might be more officers. Because in the past X number of years, my taxes have gone up. I'm sure you've heard this before. Everything's gone up. The assessment on my house has gone up. City light tax now on the street lights that were your neighbors, you know, our neighbors put up. All these increases, and I don't know if this is accurate, so you could help me with this, but what has the staffing been in the last 5 years, the last 10 years? How can there be more police in the area? How can the staffing be increased so that there can be more resources available?
So, a very good question. So the staff of the police department has increased by 15 officers in the last 5 years. Those are on federal grants. Those of you who followed the council meeting the other night, 5 of the positions that the council is now funding this year are because the grant ended. It's a 3-year cycle that the federal government pays for 3 years, and then we adopt it after that. So the staffing has gone up, and that's why I talk about it. The staffing is higher than it ever has been in the police department. One of the things that I think we need to look at, and this is where I'm convinced nationally at the debate on use of force and incarceration of people for minor offenses and everything else, I have no commitment to traffic citations. Now that's going to make the council member cringe a little bit because there's money coming into the city there. But right, I've got no commitment to traffic things. The #1 complaint that comes into the police department is traffic. Is that people are speeding. The #1, and not to minimize any, but I mean, that is the #1 complaint that comes in. Now, we don't put our patrol officers out to do traffic enforcement. That is the motorcycle unit. There's 20 motorcycle officers that do primarily all our traffic enforcement at school zones and those different things. Now, I don't have a problem, right, if we as a community, right, as Salt Lake City residents say, we no longer feel that traffic enforcement is the priority for our police department. Then let's take the police officers and put them somewhere else and we won't write traffic tickets. I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm not an angry driver, so I don't care if people speed down the street because everyone blows my doors off because I drive the unmarked black car that no one knows is a police car. But I could spend all day long pulling people over for speeding, and I don't, or I'd never get anywhere. But we can say, right, this is what the discussion needs to turn to. What is the priority for us to undertake with the resources that we have? Because we've actually had a pretty, the battles between the police chief and the council have been kind of epic over the last few months, but they're not as bad. But over the last few years, we've had tremendous support from the politicians and the public to increase the size of the police force, to increase our budget, and to support us in the missions that we've undertaken.
And you still have a lot of support.
No, absolutely we do.
Council.
I'm a little facetious on that,
yeah,
I apologize. No, it has been tremendous. I mean, like I say, it's increased. And so across the nation, 3 years ago, there were 40,000 fewer police officers than the year before. In 1 year, 40,000 police officers lost their job in this nation. Salt Lake City in that same year hired 8 new police officers. So that's tremendous support going in the right direction. So now I think we need to talk about how do we allocate those resources? What is the priority for us?
Okay, so the next question is from this this lady right here. And when you ask a question, if you can introduce yourself as well, I think that'd be nice.
Hi, I'm Jyotsna Sainath, and I'm a new resident of East Bench. And while prevention of crime is, prevention of burglaries specifically is certainly an important thing, I have a question about the follow-up after an event has taken place. Our house was burgled and sometime in the middle of February, and I don't really want to get into the specifics of the case because it probably is not of general interest. But what I did find would probably be of general interest is the fingerprinting results came back after 8 weeks, and evidently this is not something that's out of line. And given the nature of the crime, that it's done by a floating population, it just seemed like an incredibly long period of time to take in order to get the results back. And then once a case becomes inactive, there's really no way to track whether there's any way of catching the culprit in the future. Evidently fingerprinting is done only, those checks are only made against convicted criminals, and then not really against possibly future fingerprints that might be collected in homes that have been burgled. If someone is caught in the future, it might create a trail, and it might solve some unresolved cases from the past. These seem to be logical steps that the police department could take, but evidently my information from the detective who was working on our case is these things are not done.
So I would like to know what detective you talked to, because that is wholly inaccurate. So fingerprints are not as magic as they are on TV, nor is DNA. I would love to be able to say, no. But they are kept, and they're kept on file with that case, and then they are compared. Now, we only can compare fingerprints, right? If your fingerprints or someone's fingerprints are left at the scene of a crime, I cannot compare those against civilian population. I mean, there's a constitution that prevents me from doing some of those and just doing this random search. But we compare it against a criminal database. Not always does that come back as a positive match. But those are retained because that's exactly how we clear cases in the future. And we hold people accountable. So at some point, right, we catch somebody and we look and we say, okay, what have you done? Sometimes they tell us, oh, I did 2 or 3. We start to go back and match those. And that becomes a known offender in the database. And because now fingerprints are all electronic, it becomes easier to do those future comparisons. So they are never lost. Yes, cases are inactive, become inactive when there's no leads to follow up on. And this goes from a homicide all the way down to a car prowl, right? No matter what. So our detectives constantly look at the caseload that sits in front of them in conjunction with their supervisor, their sergeant, and say, this is what I think I can solve, and this is how I work it, right? I've got nothing to go on here, so that case becomes inactive, but it doesn't go away, right? It still exists, and it's still a case that we're responsible for clearing. We clear, Fred or somebody in the back, is it 28% on burglaries? I can't remember what the, so we're up around 30% is what we clear, right? And there's a national standard by the FBI that says this is how you report a clearance in a crime. And we clear, like I say, about 30% of those crimes get cleared, right, satisfactorily. Very small number. Thankfully, property or persons crimes get cleared at a much higher rate. We clear about 98% of the homicides. In fact, we're at 100% the last couple of years. But so what happens is those never go off our books as a good clearance. So for a detective to be able to go back at some point and say, aha, I've got somebody, I'm going to clear 25 cases, that's huge, because that's 25 cases that go off basically his accountability and the police department. So we never get rid of those. But they are, I mean, this is the challenge that we face. One of the things that I think is very important for everybody to know is the most expensive crime that occurs is fraud. Internet fraud is immense. Now, it doesn't sell newspapers, right? But if you look by comparison at the amount of fraud that takes place on the internet that we are all exposed to every single day, that we end up paying for with credit cards and banks and everything else, it's astronomical. And the cost is enormous. But the public doesn't stand up and say, hey, we want to do something better here. Because part of our challenge is, and I mean, it's happened to me. I mean, how many of you have your credit card stolen, right? Thankfully, American Express calls you up and says, hey, somebody's trying to use this in Saudi Arabia. Happened 3 times to me in the last 2 years. I mean, and we all get subject to that. I had a woman come in my office in tears. I'm trying to apply to get a home. And they tell me I have no credit because someone in Milwaukee is using my identification and has been for 2 years and set up bank accounts and been fraudulent and everything else. So now I say, well, okay, I've got no jurisdiction in Milwaukee. Milwaukee says, well, hey, wait a minute. You know, that crime didn't occur in Milwaukee. That occurred here or in Salt Lake because, you know, this person says, oh, I was never in Milwaukee. And then you have a federal government that doesn't have the ability to do this and things bounce. And so these are the types of things that we need to get a better handle on because it's a significant cost to all of us, as is the burglaries and those types of things.
Chief, let's get another question.
Sure.
The lady in the black and white stripe, and then we'll come back here.
Hi, I'm Gina Keachel, and we live in the Harvard-Yale. My question is, what are the top 10 things that we can do as civilians in our homes to help you to prevent this kind of thing? What can we do? What are we doing wrong that lets these people into our houses?
Okay, so there's and these are easy. One is close your garage and lock your doors. You would be amazed when we pull up, and we can statistically do this, how many burglaries occur because someone left the garage open or the back door open. And I'm sorry that we can't do that. I wish I could leave my door open all the time, but it doesn't work that way. So you close and lock your doors. So this is how I will answer that. Because burglars evaluate what is my risk.
Just, since she wasn't mic'd up and I know
Oh,
that
sorry.
IMS is doing it, if you could just repeat the question for her.
She asked how effective is a burglar alarm. So the challenge that you have personally when you start to evaluate your security, right, is a dog a deterrent, right? Is a radio a deterrent? If you leave a radio on, leave a light on, you have an alarm system. If I'm a burglar, if I'm a criminal of any type, I don't want to get caught. So if the likelihood, if I look, I evaluate risk as I walk down the street. The open garage is really inviting. And the risk is small for me to duck in there and duck out really quick, especially if I have a partner who's watching down the street. Now, if I have to open a door and go in, risk is a little higher, but I ring the bell, nobody answers, I open the door and walk in, it's unlocked. Now, if I have to break glass or break a door, that becomes more noticeable. So my risk starts to increase. So if there's a chance there's an alarm, if there's a dog, if the lights are on and maybe somebody home, if a radio's on and somebody's home, right? If you tell your neighbors when you're leaving town, you would be amazed. If you are going out of town, you don't cancel your paper and you don't have someone shovel the snow, your odds of somebody breaking in your house is astronomical. Now, again, I would love to be able to tell you, in fact, for me, it hurts a little bit that we can't just say, yeah, I'm going out of town and I'm not going to worry about shoveling the snow while I'm gone. That's the kind of neighborhood I want to live in, but those are very hard to come by and you can't find, I mean, it's just not the reality that we live in. So cancel or not cancel, but suspend your mail, right? Have them hold it when you go out of town. Let your neighbors know. Right? Find the neighbors that you trust. If you imagine, if I'm here in the middle and I take care of this neighbor and I take care of this neighbor and they do vice versa on either side, you've got a pretty safe neighborhood. Who knows in your neighborhood who belongs and who doesn't? You know, I told you I drive through your neighborhood all the time. Well, I've only lived there for less than a year in this particular neighborhood. So I don't essentially know all the neighbors. I may have seen your wife walking around the neighborhood. I don't know if she's the regular or not. Now, I'll get to know her, right? But she knows better than anybody. And when someone's in the neighborhood who doesn't belong, those are the calls that may come in or should come in, right? Someone is doing this. There's a tree service car parked outside, but there's nobody mowing the lawn. That's highly suspicious. We should get calls on that. Now, you're going to say, and rightfully so, well, then you don't respond when we call you. Or you're going to tell me it's 2 hours later. Well, that'll rise to a little bit higher list, right? Because it's potentially an in-progress thing. And it will be something that, right, if a cop happens to be driving by, that's exactly how we solve those cases. And then that becomes the person whose fingerprints are in her house that I clear 25 other cases for. So those are the types of things that are very important. Calling us and letting us know. In fact, where did Ken go? Somebody was telling me about their car being prowled. Let us know. We're not going to solve that for you. I'm sorry. Chances of us catching that are very slim. But when we know that's going on, that's how I start to deploy those resources and detectives, just as I talked about.
Okay, Chief, let's go to another question.
Hi, my name is Bibiana. I live on Bonneville Trail, where everybody bikes and there's marathon going on. So there's a lot of strangers in my neighborhood.
You have a challenge.
Statistically speaking, I came to this town 2 years ago from Harlem, New York, and I was never burglarized. I came here, my house was burglarized. I lost all my jewelry from my grandmother, my mother, everything. And my car was broken into. I lost my GPS. My house was closed. Unfortunately, I forgot to alarm my car that day. It was really cold, and I must have forgotten. So statistically speaking, in 2 years, in a new neighborhood, I felt really safe. I came here, this is a lovely neighborhood, everybody's so friendly, twice. And have I seen a patrol in my neighborhood? So I went and reported, Salt Lake City police officer. I said I was burglarized and my car was broken into. And he wrote it down. And I said, I am willing to volunteer for a neighborhood watch, to circle around for a neighborhood watch. And then later, I saw in City Weekly, so-and-so from Salt Lake City Department is looking for a neighborhood watch. So I was happy to see that because something I reported was being followed through. And I was more happy to see a meeting today because more things are following through in District 6. And I would like to bring the focus back to District 6. What's going on in online, federal government has to take care of it. So let's focus back on District 6 and what we're doing. Especially like me, who's living on Bonneville Trail, there's so many strangers. And I spoke to a retired police officer just a few blocks down my house, and he said, everybody's casing. And I was walking on Bonneville Trail, and I saw a white car that hood was open, the trunk was open. So I knocked on every door, and because I had a bad experience, I knocked on the door, and this is when I spoke to the retired policeman. He said, okay, I'm a retired policeman. This car's been sitting here with a trunk open since 1 o'clock this afternoon. And I was walking at 5 o'clock. And he said, do you live here? Yes, I do. And he said, okay, I'm gonna watch, and if nobody claims it, I'm gonna report it. So for someone like me who's living on a Bonneville Trail, I feel very vulnerable. And I was very happy to see a motorcycle patrol officer right by the Sunnyside, no, not by where it is, 1300, where the gas station is. I was very happy to see the motorcycle patrol officer every morning at the stop sign giving stop tickets. Like people who are not stopping at that time, he was giving tickets. Because I spoke to so many police officers, and they said, I've caught burglars by just issuing stop signs because you would see items in their car. So I said, oh, I'm glad to see someone there giving tickets for stop sign. Yesterday, I saw a patrol car. For the first time I came here, I had to do a double take. I was driving, and I saw a patrol car, and I was like, whoa. So I'm happy something is being done, but statistically speaking, twice in 2 years is a lot.
All I can say is I'm sorry. I would love to be able to say it's never going to happen to you again, but I can't. But one of the things that is very difficult is that I don't know if more police officers are going to solve that problem. Right? Because we had, again, the highest number of police officers in the nation in the 90s, and that was when crime was at an all-time high. Now we've had fewer police officers throughout the United States over the last few years, and crime has declined dramatically across the board. So is it always an equation of how many police officers, or is it an equation of how effective we are and how we interact? And so that's a little bit, so what you described as the car, right? You have now contacted people. That will be handled differently because the neighbors are aware and know what's going on. And so those are good, positive things that we want to take place in our neighborhood. Absolutely. And I have yet to find an area of this city or this nation, or in fact anywhere that I've visited, that is not subject to some sort of criminal activity. And I'm not making an excuse for that. We in society need to decide how are we going to best manage that. And that, again, we were talking before about more police officers. I will always take more police officers, but I would never make the promise that if you give me 10 more police officers, you won't be burglarized or you won't see crime. That is a hard fact that we have to look at. But you knowing and working with us, working with the neighbors down the street, interacting with those people, that's how your neighborhood becomes positive and vibrant. There's a reason, and quite frankly, crime in this area is much lower than other areas of the city. Now, if you happen to be the one who's the the burglary victim, you're not going to feel that way, but it is much lower. There's a reason that I choose to live here, that other police officers, retired or whatnot, choose to live here, because they view it as a safe neighborhood. right? And a lot of that has to do with that people know one another and take responsibility. When you have very transient neighborhoods where the turnover is very high, apartment buildings, everything else, and nobody gets to know anybody, and people kind of take the attitude, well, it's not happening to me, so I'm not going to worry about it. Well, that's when crime thrives. That's why we have such a problem in and around the homeless shelter. It's not that the homeless people are more criminal. It's the fact that the criminals can be in and amongst the homeless people, and they don't want to call us. Because we, you know, they go to jail for drunk and disorderly, for public, or for urinating in public, for trespassing, all these other things. So they're not inclined to call the police. So the criminal element is down there.
Let's get another question from this side of the auditorium.
Just wanted to focus on, my name's John Wonderly. I live on Wasatch Drive in 13th South. Very heavily trafficked area. I just wanted to focus on your one point about calling into the police station when we see people we don't recognize in our neighborhood. It's one thing I've been thinking about for a long time, and to hear you encourage that is encouraging. But my question is, what can we expect will come out of that if all of us are calling that in?
So certainly there needs to be some responsibility that comes with it. I mean, there is a gentleman who's going around the neighborhood selling meat. I don't know how many of you have encountered him. Frozen meat out of the back of his truck. Had a chat with him. Appears pretty legitimate to me. He wouldn't be somebody that I would call. I mean, he actually has product in the truck that you can see, and there's something going on. But other people, so what happens is again, if you call and say, there's somebody walking through my neighborhood, and they're kind of looking, walking up and down driveways, hanging out, lingering, right? Very suspicious activity. The dispatcher's gonna say, okay, you know what, we're really busy, sir. It's gonna be 45 minutes before I can get you a cop, but thanks for calling. Well, what that does is it goes out to the police officer. So the officer she described as might be down the street doing traffic. He's showing is busy, right? Because he's writing a traffic ticket or doing whatever. So the dispatcher doesn't have the ability, is not going to send him to this. But he sees that come up and goes, hey, wait a minute, I'm down the street. Zips by, takes a look at this. No, it's all right. Hey, what's your ID? What are you doing? Oh, you live down there? Okay, great. See you later. Or, oh, you're a problem. And that's exactly that very intersection, the new house construction that's being done with the nice new copper gutters. I was involved in the arrest down there, so just so you know, the police chief does work every once in a while of somebody who was burglarizing that house in the middle of the night. And it was the same sort of thing. They would park over where the construction workers park and cross the street and then just wait and watch, and when nobody was coming, they'd walk out with the saw and put it in the back of their truck. And so people saying or people noticing are some of those things. So it does have impact. Lighting has tremendous impact. Right? The more lights on in the neighborhood, the more that people can be seen in the middle of the night, the better. There are certain people who are home in the middle of the day, and certain people who are not. If your neighbors across the street are retired and home 90% of the time during the day, get to know them and have a conversation. Hey, you know what? I go to work every day at 7 a.m. Right? We just kind of keep an eye on my house. Nobody should be coming to my house. Or my mother-in-law comes over every Friday and from this time to this time or whatever it is. But keep an eye on it. And you know what? I'll do the same thing for you, because I know you guys like to go be with your grandkids on the weekends and you go away. I'll take care of your house on the weekends because I don't work on the weekends, so I'm home. And then you start to develop those relationships that when people are there, I mean, we tell these stories, but right, there are cases where people walk across very well intending and help the burglars unload the TV into the back of the truck and wave goodbye. And you ask them, well, I thought I was helping them move. Get to know your neighbors, right? That is what is the most intimidating to people who are intent on committing crimes. Saying hi to people on the street. Hey, how are you? Do you live around here? That scares crooks to death. Now, I would never advocate you go out and confront crooks, but certainly letting them know. If you see something outside in the middle of the night, turn your porch lights on.
Chief, let's get another question. So,
you're trying to moderate me, aren't you?
I'm trying to.
Good luck.
Hey, I love you, Chief Burbank, but yeah, a lot of questions.
Chief, thanks for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. And I think this is a very valuable forum. But tonight, my questions would relate to the disturbance and crime reports that were distributed to the community councils prior to 3 years ago. And these reports were very valuable to each of the community councils in reviewing the crime that had been occurring in their areas. And it fostered a good discussion between the people attending our meetings and the detective attending the meeting. And there was a good feeling about what was happening, that they felt comfortable knowing what was happening and what the police were doing about it. 3 years ago, you adopted a new software package, and with that, it would require you to do some reprogramming to continue to provide or reinstate the publication of these reports for each of the councils. And so you indicated, and when I say you, I mean your department, you indicated that those reports would be reinstated 2 or 3 months after some additional program was completed. And the problem is that about every other meeting in the councils, we asked the detective attending the meetings as to what the status was of reinstating those crime reports. And for 3 years, the message was consistent. It's 2 or 3 months away. And that happened for 3 years. And so at about the end of 3 years, we have 7 of the community councils who got a little frustrated and impatient after 3 years of hearing the same message and no results. And so we wrote a letter, which you received a copy of, requesting that those reports be reinstated, and that if there were any questions, that we were willing to sit down and talk to you about the issues that might pertain to reinstating those reports. Well, after the letter was sent out, it wasn't more than 2 or 3 weeks, and we got an email from your department that went out to the community councils that said, we no longer are going to provide data to the community councils, period. And you referred us to your new website that has crime data on it. And I attended the workshop that your officers put on the new website and so forth. And those of us that attended and others have looked at the website and concluded that it did not allow the community councils to go in and generate the types of reports that they found very valuable to their members 3 years ago. And we have made those comments to the people who conducted that workshop. Now, in effect, what your decision has done by saying we are no longer going to provide these reports, you've shifted the burden of preparing those reports to the community councils. And the community councils will have to do that by hand. And basically, what that does is it just shifts that burden. And I don't see any reason why it has to be that way. Certainly, if we were to agree with you and the community councils as to what should be provided, what kind of a format and so forth, and what data, that's a one-time programming effort on the part of the police department to assist the community councils in assessing and discussing crime in their areas. So I basically just have 2 questions. One is, why did you mislead the community councils for 3 years running when you told them repeatedly that you would provide those reports and it was coming in the near future? That's my first question.
Okay, I didn't know if you were going to ask me 2 in a row. I'm happy to answer that. So you know, I take responsibility for everything that goes on in the organization, good, bad, or indifferent, whether I know about it or not, because I'm in charge. And that's exactly where the buck stops. So I will take responsibility for that. I'm curious about the 2 or 3 months, because when we instated it was that we're not going to do paper copies anymore. We're going to refer people to the web page in order to be more environmentally friendly and to provide more current information. And so the idea was, and I have been told and also have been given some demonstrations, that it is able to do just that. Now, you telling me that it won't accomplish that is I mean, and I heard this, I can't remember which of the council members told me about this the other night, but I will look at that. But my understanding, right, was, and it was never my intent, when we went to the computerized system, that it would not be to produce the paper anymore, that we would have an avenue that where people could pull that up on the web page, and it could be as current as you want it to be. And so you telling me that it doesn't function the way it's supposed to is something that, again, after council meeting, I've had several discussions with different people about that, and so I will be happy to look at it, and I will personally look at it and see what is available, right, and how accessible it is, because it is so much easier on us to send the information out than to have people request it, and I certainly don't see any reason for your people to be going through and adding numbers up. I mean, this day and age, it should exist on there. And I'm curious as to why it's not generating a report that you want to generate. Now, if it's a comparative thing or whatever, we can talk further off that because this could go longer. Please.
Okay, and Dennis, if you could do just one more question.
Sure.
I know there are a lot of others too.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear your response that you're willing to talk about that, because we would like to sit down with you and talk about it. But the second question is how you feel about the department making commitments like we interpreted those commitments. And if it would have been said to us once, 2 or 3 months, that would be one thing. You would think, well, somebody misunderstood. But to get it routinely said for 3 years, obviously, through different detectives, someone was feeding him that information, which misled us. So I feel there was a commitment there on the part of the department, whether it was in agreement with your intention or not, there was a commitment there. And I guess that brings a couple things to mind, is if we can't have faith in the police department and what you tell us and so forth, to me it raises a question of credibility of the department that you ought to be concerned about. And the second thing is, you know, my father once told me, he says, you know, if you make a commitment, you live by that commitment. And if you live by that commitment, or you either do that or you find a mutually acceptable resolution. And I hope that you would share that type of philosophy.
Well, I won't disagree with you at all. And again, I have 700 employees and volunteers that work for me, and there's a lot that gets said every single day. There's not a single officer that calls me up and says, hey, Chief, I'm about to be involved in a shooting. Are you okay with it? My responsibility, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. That ultimately is my responsibility to deal with. And so you telling me exactly what you did, I will deal with it as I feel appropriate in order to make sure the organization runs correctly. Because never the intention, and when you say the department, it's a very difficult thing, but in my mind, the department runs at my direction, and my direction was we were going to change how we were doing business, and it was going to be adequate in order to meet your needs, and it doesn't sound like it has, and so we will work towards that mutually acceptable arrangement to get that taken care of. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bill. The lady, blonde hair, waving her hand.
It was a good wave, it got his attention.
My name's Barbara Van Aslen, and I live on the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. And commenting about the woman who's been robbed, and she thinks that they should have neighborhood watch. I think you've got to be proactive. Don't wait for someone else to do it, but you start it yourself. And another thing, even if your car is in your garage, you should have it locked at all times, because these codes that you have for your garage door openers, they only have so many codes, and what happens during the daytime, they come and they see whose garage will open up, and then they can go in. I lived in Europe, and it was mandatory that your car is locked at all times. My car's locked in my garage constantly, and I get upset sometimes because I go out to get in it, and I've got to go in and, you know, unlock it. But I think that can help prevent a lot. Just be proactive, start your own neighborhood watch, and make sure your garage is down, like the chief said, but also keep your car locked at all times.
So absolutely, a good suggestion. So I lock my car in my garage all the time. I mean, it's just one of those weird things that I do. But we evaluate risk to ourselves, right? And we don't want to live paranoid, right? There's certain things that expose us to a little more risk. Like I say, leaving your house unlocked when you go away. Turning lights on is inconvenient. It costs you a little bit of money in order to do it, but that tends to reduce some risk. Going to the Jazz game and leaving your computer in the front seat of your car is increasing your risk. And you laugh, but that happens all the time. I mean, those are the types of things that we need to evaluate. And it is everything we do in life, right? If you stand at 7th East at 5 o'clock in the evening and decide I'm going to cross in the middle of that street and just run blindly, well, your risk is greatly increased, right? Going down to the crosswalk, a little more inconvenient, takes you a little more time, but it does reduce the risk. It's something that we need to weigh, and I will never tell you to be paranoid, and it's unfortunate that we live in this, but we need to constantly evaluate what is that risk that's acceptable to us personally and then to us as a community, and that's how you start to make those decisions. All the shootings and everything that goes on, we could screen everybody going into a grocery store that you go through like an airport in order to go to the Smiths. It makes Smiths really safe, but would you want to shop there? I know I wouldn't. So those are the types of things that we just need to evaluate both personally and collectively as a community as to what is acceptable to us. And then we want to minimize it and to help each other, and then we need to do our part. I mean, I'm not here to say that crime is not my concern and it's not my responsibility. Absolutely it is, but we are much more effective with all of you.
Okay, Chief, next question, lady in the front row.
I am certain at the beginning of this meeting, those with questions were asked to sit in the front row.
You were, so thank you for being obedient.
You followed the rules.
I followed the rules.
Thank you.
My name is Carol Butler, and my house was burglarized, and I was very pleased with the response from the police. But it's not on the crime report website, and I'm wondering, how does it get on there so that others who are looking at this website can see that, oh, there's one on Laird Avenue and there's one on Harvard and probably Princeton's going to be next? That's my first question. And do you want me to go on to my second?
Ask two, I can handle it.
Okay, great. You mentioned that other communities bring their homeless people to downtown Salt Lake to receive the benefits that we provide here. Does the police force receive resources, funds, or whatever from these other communities that use the homeless shelter, that bring their folks there? Do you receive any benefit from outer communities?
No. Okay. And to be honest with you, I don't want those resources, but the city should receive those resources.
Yeah, and I can address that one with you after if you'd like, because that is an issue that we have not dealt with and that we're now dealing with. So,
as to your first question, on our webpage you looked at this, or on because there's all kinds of different web pages out there that you can look at crime and everything else, but it was the Salt Lake City webpage?
The Yale Crest Council sent out a website, crimereports.com, that shows all the crimes throughout the neighborhood of the city. It's a little, okay. The Yale Crest folks sent out an email with crimereports.com, and it shows the different crimes that have occurred throughout the city. And you can zoom right in onto the neighborhood and find out, was that a theft or a vehicle robbery, a house theft, a vehicle theft, a sexual assault, etc. And so I'm just wondering, my house was burglarized, but it didn't show up on that crime report website. And should it? And is that not your website? Is that
it should be on there. And okay. So I've got people back there making note of this right now as we speak to find out why. So the only thing that we would ever really take out of that are child sexual assaults. And that we would want to keep protected. I mean, that wouldn't necessarily hit that. But otherwise, everything should have, and that definitely should have. So we'll look into it.
Okay.
Someone with a microphone.
Yep.
Hello, my name is Michael Dodd. I'm chair of Wasatch Hollow Community Council. I live on 17th East.
Michael?
Or 17th
sorry.
South.
Before you do that, anyone who has a question, just so that we can, because I know that there are a lot of questions I'm going to ask again, if you can move into the front row, just so that I can have a better idea as to who still wants to ask a question. That'll help to kind of facilitate this. So. If you could just move up while Michael's asking his question. Michael, sorry to interrupt you.
That's all right. I live in near Wasatch Hollow. It seems to me tonight we're talking a lot about community and taking responsibility. And I really appreciate a sense of community, and I really appreciate developing that with the Salt Lake Police Department. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about, they used to be the CAT teams. I think they're now the Community Intelligence Units. We currently have Detective Stum, whom we're getting to know. We've had him for a few months. But before that, we had a series of replacement officers since Detective Olson was moved from our area. And it seems to me that getting to know a police officer in your area would really help build a sense of community and give people someone that they could reach out to. But it seems that the position for the community intelligence officer has been kind of a stepping stone to elsewhere, so we rarely get a chance to know that officer.
Okay, so let me address it, not to cut you off, but so I had this come up in the council meeting the other day. So what we did is we used to have individuals that we assigned that were not police officers that came to the police department that we hired, and they filled that role. That was a mistake in policing that we've made. Right? The idea that you have a handful of friendly officers or a handful of community people and they're the ones that go out and are nice and friendly and then the cops just do whatever they want to do is not really the most productive, because what was happening is, and I made this change when I became the police chief, right? We talked and talked and talked and listened and listened and listened, but we never turned into solving the problems. And so when I became the police chief and we were still dealing with problems that I dealt with when I was a brand new officer, that's ridiculous. So what I did is I said, okay, how do you change a culture in an organization, right? You got to make them do what you want them, what you think is important. The number one thing that I believe is important in a police agency is to interact and have the trust of the public, right? And to know how to obtain that, right? It's not enough to come and say we had a conversation, right? You have to take care of business. When someone tells you, it's like when I get told there's a report, I can nod my head, thanks for telling me, and I go on to the next thing. Is he going to be very satisfied if it goes another 3 years? Not at all, right? So the object is to solve it. So what I did is I took the candidates for promotion and said, you are now going to go out and work with the community. I am a product of this. The reason I am the police chief is because I was the executive officer to the police chief, the former police chief, and worked with the council, developed the relationships with the mayor and the community, and that's how I got to where I got to. That's exactly what I want all my officers to be. Not a handful, but every single one. So what we've done by doing this is we have created 40 supervisors within the organization, probably more than that, but I'm just going to say 40 right now, that know how to liaison and work with the community. So having received this from the council, I went back and said, okay, they're complaining that it's turning over really quickly. I'm not promoting that many people, right? So the fastest we've ever promoted anyone out of there is 4 months. The average is 18. So then I said, well, then why am I getting hit with, well, they never stay very long? Well, what happened is the people over that, and so, you know, I am a hands-off leader, right? I have 7 deputy chiefs. My expectation is they run the organization, their area, in 7 different parts of the police department, and so on down the line. Well, someone said, well, we're going to rotate so people get more experience in other parts of the city. That experiment didn't work because of your feedback. That has now been changed, and we'll go back to where the officer comes into the intelligence unit, right, so 1 of 8, and stays there until the point he's being promoted. And at a minimum, right, because there's 8 of them in there, and I don't promote that many at any one given time, they are going to stay probably for a minimum of a year, which is what I really intended, right, because I want every single officer to have that experience, to know who you are, because now what you've done, and you can probably name them, I mean, you said Brett, you can probably name the ones that you've had. They're out, the supervisors that are in charge of the new officers and the shifts who now go and have you as a resource and know a better way to do business in order to communicate with the public. So it is the best way to do business that I know to change a culture, but we stumbled a little. And so we left you short and we rotated. We're not going to rotate anyone, so you should see a much more consistent officer there. We're still going to promote them out and give you a new one, but you'll get to know them a little better. But then the idea is, at some point in the distant future, everybody in my organization will know how to do business appropriately and what the priority is for the police chief.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do on the front row, we're going to start right on this edge, and we're just going to move.
Whoa, wait a minute, Charlie. Some of us are back here that did the first 3 rows.
Okay.
As they asked. Now you're going to jump to there. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, here's the thing. There's a lot of people that have had their hands up all night. Everyone that wants to ask a question will be able to ask a question. So that I'm going to commit to you right now. But we have to have some order in how we move this forward. That's why, you know, we requested to do it before. It then kind of went sporadic. We're now moving back this way. So what I'm going to do is start from the front and then move to the back. But if you want to, anybody who wants to ask a question will have that opportunity tonight. So, okay, let's start right here.
I'm not going to introduce myself for my son's privacy, but we've just, as a family, gone through a very long and difficult journey through mental illness in the last year. And looking at statistics, I know that we are one of many, many families that's experienced this. We were really fortunate that my son's experience started on the campus, and the police were actually kind of our best friends in this. When they worked with my son, they were the first people to tell us that they thought we were working with a mental illness. And we're very grateful that they had the experience and the training that they had. We have had to call the police to our home through Salt Lake, and they were very empathetic, but they didn't seem like they had any real experience or any knowledge. And I'm just wondering if we can hope that there will be more training for our Salt Lake City Police responding, and if you have any advice if we do have to ask for a mental illness response.
So every single officer that comes through our police department, unlike anywhere else in the state, receives CIT training, which is the crisis intervention, which is a mental health thing. So every single one of them have been exposed to that. So you will know. Now, I will tell you, just like there's any profession, right? I have extremely good officers. I have some that aren't as good, and I have a whole bunch in the middle. Right? Now, the unfortunate thing with the police department is you dial 911, hey, send me the nice, friendly, empathetic officer who looks just like me, speaks the language, and understands everything I'm going through. It doesn't happen very well. But what I will guarantee is if you call the police department and you say, this is what I'm experiencing, they will try and get you those officers with more experience. We have some that volunteer to do a little extra as far as the CIT program. It's still voluntary to be the call-out person. And that's the officers that you want to get, those ones that are there. The others have had the exposure and the training. We will continue to train them in that vein. But the other thing that you can do, because you're experiencing this, and this is a little iffy, but I recommend this to parents who have autistic children. You can call the police department and have your home flagged in our database. So when a call comes up, it's going to say that you have a son that suffers from mental illness. Right? And so that will give you more directed help. We do that same thing with autistic children who wander away. And so anytime that address comes up, it's, oh, and that goes right out to whatever officer is responding. Or in the case of an officer says, oh, I've dealt with, let me take that call. So it's a choice you get to make that you're flagging your address in the police department, but you're flagging it for a good reason. So you know this is the exact same system, though I don't want to ever lead anyone astray. This is the same system that we would flag for the crazy man who calls and threatens to kill the police chief on a regular basis. Right? But there is a difference between what that note will say. It's not just an arbitrary emergency kind of thing. It actually is a note that says this is what the problem is. So there's some avenues that we can work with, and I mean, it is a very difficult situation, and we need to do a much better job as a profession across the nation in this particular area. No.
No, yes. Okay, I'm Alexis Krull, and I'm on the East Bench Community Council. And I'm kind of piggybacking on a couple of other things. One is the turnover of the District 6 officer. It'd be great if we could have Detective Stum for a long time so that we can actually have a relationship. We had a great relationship with Detective Olson. He was super helpful. And then just it seems like for the last year we haven't really had a point person.
I think we've corrected that.
Yeah. So during that transition period, Detective Olson was very forthcoming to let us know what was going on. If there was a burglary, he would give us some details. I mean, he wouldn't tell us all the personal information, but at least we'd know, okay, somebody entered through a garage, or this is what was going on. And then we got another detective who's like, I can't give you any information about anything. And I found that to be odd, given that I get the police press releases every day about major incidents or whatever, and it'll be like, Bob Jones, age 56, birth date, blah, blah, blah. And like you get all this information, personal information about these criminals and things, but you can't tell us what happened on Blaine and how that house was broken into or what was being done. So I would like to be able, because we're gonna start a neighborhood watch. I live on 17th between Foothill and Wasatch. We have the gorgeous motel at the end of our street. And there's a lot of weird stuff that happens. And so I'm gonna be going around to the neighbors on our block to start a neighborhood watch. It would be nice if we could partner with our detectives to get some of the color around some of the incidents that we're seeing on these reports so that we can help you and you can help us so that we can close the gap on what's actually happening. So are you telling them that they can't give us any?
No, absolutely not. So you need to train these people. Part of what this process is, see, I take the candidates for promotion and I put them in here, and the feedback I get on how they do, sometimes I decide not to promote them.
Yeah, they tell us no.
In all honesty, that's exactly what, this is a testing ground for new sergeants. You need to train them and say, this is what our expectation is.
Yeah.
And say, you talk to the police chief, and he said to give us more information, and if you're not getting that, call my office, and I'll make sure you get that.
Okay, good.
And that's going to be a mark that goes against that person that he's not doing a very good job as a potential supervisor in my organization. This is partly what I do. I mean, this is, because what I found, right, when I first became the police chief, I've been doing this for a long time now, 9 years. When I first became the police chief, I knew everybody. And I'd go, hey, I don't want you to be a sergeant, right? But now I got all these new people that I don't know how they work or do anything. And so I want to see how they perform in the community. Because again, that's the most important thing. So train them.
So if we're willing to do the neighborhood watch and lock our doors and do all this, then we want our District 6 person to help us.
I want him to.
Good.
Or she.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Hallie, and I live on Wasatch with Bonneville Shoreline Trail access also. And first off, I'd like to thank you and Charlie Luke in part for hosting the site this evening here because of the incident that happened over a month ago, and I have a bag of the evidence right here. And part of the issue was vandalism, trespassing, and hate crime. Now, the issue is that when I walked in here tonight, Officer Tim, who's been wonderful also, this was the first time that I heard follow-up in a month. And so echoing other people, when you have a case, I was given first email saying, case closed unless something else happens. Unfortunately, something else did. And then it became the second case. Luckily, I had neighbors who were able to photograph some of the perpetrators who are students at this very school. And that's partly how it got here tonight. But the bottom line is I showed up, I talked with the assistant principal who said, oh, it couldn't be those kids. And it seems to be. And then I got a call from one of your detectives, and I'll tell you the name later, and he said, oh, one of the kids said they had your permission to go on your property and vandalize it and trespass and take your property.
You didn't give them permission for that?
Oh, but of course. So I was driving my daughter to school, and I put on my huffy mommy voice with a detective, and he started getting huffy in turn. It's like, excuse me, you really think I would have given a kid permission? I'd like to talk with those kids' parents, or I'd like to talk with the school again. And then I heard nothing until I walked in tonight, and I shook hands with Tim. So, skipping to my question. I'm really happy with how graffiti removal came right in. I met with Carol and Tim in my house, and we took care of figuring out civil enforcement. Good things happening like that. Problem is, like any other number of things, follow up and follow through. One of the main points that I made in the process of turning this to the good for the community is saying anyone who's knowing or having access to what is now going to become the Arcadia Nature Preserve needs to know property lines for householders and property owners and for public access. We all agreed to that. Tim and I shook hands on that too. I've seen nothing in terms of trespassing warning signs, and what I was suggesting specifically with emails back and forth with Charlie, whom I greatly appreciate, is that Nothing has happened for making sure that part of enforcement allows for you as officers to have the signage that it takes in order to enforce. And if you don't have consistent signs, if it's just a little thing from the grocery store saying no trespassing or marker pen, it doesn't do it. There needs to be consistency, and that has not happened. So I'd like to recommend and ask you to please take action on this so that our neighborhood is safer, especially as we continue to have increasing usage and wanting to have good access to nature. Thank you.
We need to work on that as far as the signs for
well,
that.
the signage, and Hallie, I'll tell you right now that we have a number of signs that are currently being printed through Parks and Public Lands. They're doing that right now. And those signs include the signs that are going to be up on Devonshire at the entrance there. And I believe that they're also, the yours are also in the process there. So it just, unfortunately, city government moves really, really fast. Okay, not really. But, it is in process. Things are moving forward. And the signage is, the ball hasn't been dropped. It's just taking time to get it through all the channels to get it done.
Can I just comment really quickly? Absolutely. Because one of the things, so I heard about your case through a friend of yours who talked to someone at the Jewish Community Center, who I have a relationship with the Jewish Community Center, and told me about it, and I went back and did a little research and went back, yeah, we're looking at this and everything else. Whether or not that makes it back to you, I don't know. But my point is, right, if you have questions about what's going on in the police department, right, you don't feel that it's being handled appropriately, ask for a supervisor. This goes for the moment, right? If you are on the street and you don't think the officer is doing the right thing, say, will you call a supervisor? My officers all know that, yes, they're going to call a supervisor down there. And there's one on every shift, a sergeant. There's also a watch commander who acts in my stead every single moment of the day. So ask for the supervisor. If you're not satisfied, call my office. I mean, I'm happy. My executive officer, she's back there, Lisa, right? That's her job. I call and say, Lisa, go find out about this and see what we're doing. So if you have questions, your expectation should be talk to somebody else if you're not satisfied. Now, again, I apologize because what went on in your home is absolutely inappropriate. And no one should ever be victim to that. And so I do apologize.
Okay, so before we go to Jim's question, we have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, 8 if we have time.
We're allowing twice?
Well, if we have time, yeah, that's the bonus question.
Let me just say this. I'm happy to answer questions and stay even if some of these folks can't.
Yeah,
so I'll answer your question.
And what I was just going to say is the school has given us we were supposed to be out at 8 o'clock. They've given us permission to go until 8:30. So it's now 8 o'clock. So we're going to continue. So if any of you have to leave, thank you again for coming. But we're going to be continuing to get through all the questions.
Yeah, I'm Jim Webster. I'm a former chair of Yellcrest. I live in Yellcrest. The real hot topic right now is this prison relocation thing. And people in the room may not feel that has much bearing on what we've been talking about, but I think it does. The mayor was there last night. Charlie, I can understand why he wasn't. He was at the East Bench. A couple other councilmen were there. I didn't see anybody else. The mayor went to the media and said, we don't want the prison in our community because it's going to be a dangerous thing. He should have stuck around because the mayor of Gunnison was there, and he compared the crime rate before the prison relocation to Gunnison compared to where he is now. He's been able to get by with a lot less police officers because there's a constant presence of correctional officers there. I'm assuming the same thing may be in fact due to occur at Draper, but I don't know if there's any statistics on that. Today, Channel 13, the Deseret News, and the Tribune all reported that there's a coalition of groups that are including the Catholic Diocese, ACLU, Disability Law Center, so forth. They're all advocating moving to prison because the recidivism rate is just so high and the facility is just so inadequate, and everybody's saying, well, we could leave it in Draper. All we have to do is like when we rebuilt Uinta School. We'll build it on the playground and we'll go over here and do it again. It's not going to happen that way. It can't happen that way physically. I was just curious what your thoughts are on the prison relocation, if it's a good idea, what your feelings are on recidivism, You know, you probably don't deal with the state prison as much as you do with the county, but I'm just curious what your feelings are on that, because I learned an awful lot last night that I didn't know before.
So recidivism in the United States and in this state hovers around 70%. That means 70% of the time people who offend usually reoffend in the same category after going through the criminal justice system. That is not success. When we do alternatives to incarceration, drug and alcohol treatment, mental health issues, when we do alternatives, recidivism drops to about 34%. Doesn't solve the problem, but that is a significant reduction. Right? We have demonstrated in this nation that incarcerating people or the threat of incarceration does nothing for crime. Right? We've incarcerated people at a higher rate than any other civilized nation, and we still kill more people in this nation than we know what to do with. 450 people a day. So it is not a deterrent. So we need to look at alternatives. Now we jump into, I have no idea if our prison is successful in this arena. Can they rebuild? I mean, this is an issue that, I mean, Charlie knows much more about it than I do. I am, again, from a police chief standpoint, I don't look at it as an advantage to have a prison. You know, we don't book people into prison. They are sentenced to prison. We book people into the county jail. And so there is no advantage. I don't know of any studies, but again, you're out of my area of expertise.
Well, my main issue really is that you have all the correctional officers in that immediate area. That certainly is a presence that would have to have a positive impact on your own people to supplement that. And that's what the Mayor of Gunnison was saying.
Potentially. I would really have to look at how many come and go. I mean, you got them in and around the prison, but not necessarily impacting your community, and nor do I look at, I mean, look at Salt Lake City. I've got the U.S. Marshals, the Secret Service, the FBI. I don't look at any of them to handle problems or crime in Salt Lake City. I mean, we've got tons of them running around here that are not necessarily. Now, are they a potential deterrent? Yeah, probably, but I mean, that's one that's very hard to measure that I don't know that I would take to the bank and say, oh, it's a good idea because of this. I think that's stretching it a little bit. So I think you decide issues. I mean, my number one question is, what better are you going to build, right? Maybe we should do away with the prison and build some sort of resource center that actually deals with the problem and the underlying issues of why people are committing crime.
Well, that would be the new prison.
Well, if in fact they're going that direction. Again, you're just outside of kind of where my expertise is.
And that could still be built in Draper. The notion that it can't, it doesn't make sense at all.
I mean, like I said, Charlie's,
and I'd love to talk to anybody for hours and hours and hours on why we shouldn't have the prison in Salt Lake. It doesn't mean that we should continue to warehouse people the way that we have, but Salt Lake's just not the right place to do it, so. Next question.
I'm with you.
Chief, I'm Alice. I live in Indian Hills. About a month ago, I had an incident where someone came to my door at 9:20 at night, yelled, "Hey lady, hey lady." He had obviously seen me drive in 5 minutes before he came to the door. And I ended up calling dispatch, asking for an officer because he was wanting the door open. He was clearly casing my home. This is the fourth incident I have had in the last 4 years with this. I had one man come to my house twice in 5 days, demanding that I open my door. Not being the dumb blonde in the room, I did not.
Thank you. Well done.
When they won't even talk to me via my doorbell intercom, I'm not dealing with them. They need to go. I have no trespassing notices, not that anyone reads them or understands them or adheres to it. So my question to you, you had mentioned that we should call your department when we have incidences. I'm asking, why should we call when the response time is so extensive? It's so extended. I waited an hour, almost 2 hours, called dispatch back to find out if an officer was going to be coming because your dispatch had indicated to me that we needed to be available for an officer. An officer never came. It was another 3 days before I found out, thanks to Charlie, and our newest detective who's working with our district, that an officer drove by an hour later. How is that going, how is it helpful for us to call when we have no follow-up, we have no response from an officer, we're waiting to tell an officer what happened? I have cameras. I have security cameras. I have an alarm system. I had 4 dogs in my house that night, all went off, and the guy still stayed. Why should I bother to call?
So on any given night, and this is, you have to look and say what's going on. I mean, there is no question. Friday night in the middle of July could be crazy. Right? And that can be fights, it can be aggravated assaults. I mean, it can run the gambit as to what's going on that occupies officers' time. But then on any given Friday night on another night, it may be a very quick response. I mean, that is what we can do, right? So a couple reasons to call. One is it documents what goes on.
I have no case number.
You don't need a case number, ma'am. Anything in this day and age, you call the police department, it's logged in. It's all recorded, time, date, every word that's said, all my lines are recorded. So I can take your phone number, your name, and I can tell you exactly, and we can pull up the dispatch log, we can find out exactly what they said, everything else. That all exists. And so any call that comes in is logged in and categorized just like that and enters into the system that is then becoming a police report. It's a reported crime that came into the police department. Now, when you have a problem, as you've just described, right? So, you know, that's the first time I've heard about your issue. I have the ability to say, well, why didn't we respond to that? And then I can go and look and say, well, oh, okay, it was truly we were busy, right? When did the officer drive by? Every single car that you see driving around has an automatic vehicle locator that I know where it is 24 hours a day. I look on the computer, I can tell how fast it's been driving. I know exactly when they got to your front door, if they drove by, and all these other things, so that we can start to check and be accountable to you for what took place. Now, I may have to come back to you and say, well, do you know what? That night, there were 45 calls for service holding, and this is what was there. Right? But maybe it was something that went wrong somewhere else. Maybe it's a dispatch problem. I don't know. But then I can correct that and solve the problem. But if I never hear about it, if the police department never hears about it, then it becomes apathetic and we don't have any idea. And that is the challenge of society today. Right? It is not a perfect system. Right? We will do all we can to make it as close to perfect as we possibly can. But your participation is vitally important into the well-being of how we do business. Because if I never hear from you, so when I go to deploy resources, I look at it, oh, well, okay, there's 10 calls here. Oh, there were none over here. Right? So now that area expands, it gets a little bigger. I'm not going to put special assignment detectives in that area to deal with whatever the situation is if I don't think there's any problems in the neighborhood. Because there's too much, as you all know and have described, there's too much else going on everywhere else that we would want to put resources. So that is why you should call, because that makes us more effective, and that's how we work together and actually solve something. And does it help to have the police chief apologize? Right? I'm sorry. I truly am. I mean, I don't say that lightly. But we let you down. And all I can say is, knowing about that, I will do all I can to make sure that it doesn't happen again or to correct the specific issue or problem. Some of the reason that I come talk to all of you, right, is so I know. Right? This is how I get feedback and hear what's going on. I take my job very personally. Very personally. And you've seen some of that passion in different times come out, right? Because I want my people to be the best. And yes, I will be responsible for that. And I'll tell you what, if someone tells me that someone's not doing a good job, I don't care if it's a council member or the mayor or anyone else, if I think they did the right job, I'm going to stand up for that officer. Right? But I'm also going to ride the heat when we do wrong. And it doesn't sound like we did the right thing. But I have to check. I have to know. And if you made no phone call or no, I wouldn't know that. So thank you for telling me tonight.
Thank you, Chief.
Please.
All right, so I'm Eric, Alice's son. Going off of what she was saying about the incident where the person was at the door and refusing to leave, one thing that was gone over was the fact that I had to trespass the guy. He had no pamphlets, no literature to hand out. What was that?
What did he say he was doing?
He was there to get young adults from firearms and violence. I mean, it was completely obvious that he was casing the house for theft. And the part that was really the issue wasn't so much if it was just that an officer didn't show up for, just a trespass issue. That's lower on the priority list, got it. The issue was when I started to trespass him, he became belligerent, agitated, and he made threats against me to the point where I had my hand on a firearm. I'm a concealed license or concealed firearms permit holder, and I had to put hand on steel. And we reported that. And even if it was a issue of you guys were busy, and we all know that there are priorities. You're not going to be able to come out to absolutely everything. Even a phone call would have been better than nothing, rather than just being left in the dark. Going on to a couple other issues. You said that you currently have more cops and a bigger budget than before, and we're seeing an increase in crime on the East Bench. In the Salt Lake Tribune article that many of us read today, it said that you had a pretty big focus on Pioneer Park. I mean, it seems to be, it's a bit of improper asset allocation. If we see an uptick in crime over here, and the same consistent crime in Pioneer Park, which, based off the article, appeared to be drugs. People buying and selling using drugs. What's the violent crime like in Pioneer Park? What's the home invasion rate like in Pioneer Park versus what we're currently seeing in the East Bench? And then you would mention, calling when we see someone we don't recognize in our neighborhood. That's fine and only goes to a certain point, because, as you said, an officer shows up, hey, let me see your ID, who are you? And there's Terry v. Ohio, which became known as the Terry Stop Law. Police can only demand ID lawfully, and we have to lawfully give it if there's reasonable articulable suspicion that a crime is or has been committed. Criminals know this. They know their rights. I'd say better than your average citizen does. So you show up and he hasn't broken any law, he's going to tell your officer to go pound sand.
Sir, if you could wrap up your question. I know that there are
yeah, sorry.
Thanks
for
it's okay.
Thanks for the mic check.
Yeah.
So my two questions are, you have these more officers than before. What's the plan for reallocating assets as we've seen an uptick in crime on the East Bench? And kind of what's your idea for follow-up? We've heard that a lot, be it electronic, email, phone, in person, based on the situation.
So there's not an uptick in crime, right? I mean, statistically, crime is down in this neighborhood. Crime is down everywhere in Salt Lake City. And so, absolutely. So what you see is you may have burglaries that occur, right? But when you look in a year worth of burglaries, right, burglaries down 80%. Now, if you're the victim of a burglary, you're not going to be happy with that. But crime's down. So, I mean, we do put resources where we feel appropriate. And we talk to people all the time, right? If our only job is to take people and arrest them and put them in jail for every little thing that they do, I don't think we're going to be very effective. But if we know that there's a partnership that exists, that someone knows, that the people know, boy, you go into this neighborhood, someone's always calling the cops on us if they're engaged in criminal activity, right? There's always, whatever the circumstances are, there's no difference, right, between the cop who you call to the scene or the cop that's walking down the street and encounters that person. Right? They have the same ability to have a conversation. Hey, what are you up to tonight? I'm Chris. What's your name? Do you live in the area? And absolutely, they have every right in the world to say, jump in a lake, cop, I'm not talking to you. Okay, great. But does that person not know? Is there not something that went on there and there's a dialogue that took place that now at least this person knows, boy, somebody's paying attention to what I'm doing in this area?
Chief, thank you. I'm counting.
No, you're good.
No, I'm counting that we have, let's see, 5 more questions. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to this gentleman, Kelly. I'm going to come back to you because you just moved down, and then I'm going to go up to Jerry, and then this gentleman. Then we'll go to Kelly, and then we'll go to you.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay.
I'll try to be brief. Steve Fisher.
I will as well.
I live on Skyline Drive. We've had 2 incidences. Once our garage was burglarized, and another time my son's car was broken into and pretty well vandalized. In both cases, we called police primarily for insurance purposes, and the response was good. But we received a couple of pieces of information both times. The first time with the garage incident, where I had a lot of tools and a lot of fly fishing gear stolen. We were told that your officers have some sort of a relationship with the pawn shops in the area, where you do some sort of a weekly checkup with the pawn shops, what's coming in, yada, yada, yada. I'm curious, number 1, do you have that? Number 2, is it cost effective?
So it's state law that when the pawn shop takes something and they record the serial number, they put it in the database, and my people check your stolen equipment against that database. And it's not a weekly thing, it's every day, right? So when that information comes in, I have a person who's not a police officer, who's a civilian staff that is our pawn person that goes through and checks all the pawn records. And see, the difficulty is, so you have a DeWalt saw. Do you know the serial number?
No, of course not.
Right? So you're telling me it's a yellow saw that got stolen.
Exactly.
Right? So it's hard to connect some of those things to where you can actually make a case. I mean, it can be very difficult at times. So those things of high value record, or to take photographs and some of those other things that we can, just as a preventative measure. But yes, we do, and it is productive to a certain level. Because one is, the pawn shops just can't deal in stolen merchandise because they know somebody's checking, which used to be the problem with the pawn shops.
Okay.
Right? And so it does have some impact.
Okay, second question. After the car was vandalized, the officer said, well, the only way you're going to stop this is to lay in wait. So my question to you is, if
Smack
I hear,
that officer.
if I hear you know, the glass breaking in my car and I step outside with my 12-gauge shotgun and
do
fire
not
it
shoot
off.
that person.
Okay, that's the question.
Yeah, I knew it was. So yeah, you can't defend your property with what I would recommend. You hear glass break, you turn on your lights and you call 911 as fast as you can. And you say, this is an in-progress crime, right? And let them know. Yeah, it only gets you into trouble. The standard's very high. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, are we going back here first?
Yeah, we're going to go to Jerry,
okay, sorry.
then this gentleman, and then Kelly.
You wanted to get me in under the 8:30, huh? Well, I may be here till 8:30.
You scare me, Jerry.
Thank you. My name is Jerry Burgash. I live on the north end of Scenic Drive. Like Jim, I'm a former chair of the East Bench Community Council.
I was going to say, I thought you.
Oh, yeah.
We've met before.
I've been around for community council for a long time. I'm also the neighborhood watch guy. I've also worked out of my house for about the last 10, 15 years from home. So I'm home all day. I have a lot of elderly neighbors. We've had some houses that have been vacant. I'm perplexed by some of the things you've said tonight. One of your comments was evaluation, okay? And I have to admit that I have been evaluating the Salt Lake PD over the last year and a half. And the reason I say that is, and the reason I'm perplexed is because you state, one, that we have a better ratio, or pretty close to the national ratio for the per thousand officers per thousand that we should. And you said that's a good point. That's a good thing to have. You've also said that the crime and the calls for service are the lowest that they've been in 25 years. Okay, so I have to look at those facts, okay? And then I have to compare it against my experience, okay? Because having worked from home, I keep an eye out on the street because we've had vacant houses and we've had a theft, a break-in in progress about 5 years ago. My house was broken into about 4 years ago. So over this last 10 years, I have spent a lot of time watching, and I have no reservation about calling the 799-3000 number. So I have a pretty good experience record so far in calling. And the thing that really is bothering me is, and I wrote a letter, and I was asked not to send it. I wrote it to you and the mayor, and it's dated August 16th or August 18th of last summer. And I was asked not to send it by our officer that comes to the community council. And the reason he said is, well, we're reorganized. We have the new Pioneer Metro Bureau, and give us a little time for things to shake out. What I have noticed is that over the last couple of years, we always had great response when we call. I don't call because, you know, for any particular reason. I'll call because there is a suspicious person or people at the end of the street or on the street, whether it be in the middle of the afternoon or late at night or weekends or weekdays. We always got very good response. We would see officers respond within 5–10 minutes with backup very quickly behind them. Since about last August 18th, we didn't get any response. And I have heard this from not only from my experience on our street, but from the people over in Devonshire, people in the neighborhood. Now, I'm not talking about car break-ins that have already happened and they find them in the morning. I'm talking about suspicious vehicles and people in the neighborhood. And I'm actually kind of glad that I wasn't one of the earlier ones because it's kind of being a theme, like this lady down here, no response. And that's what my concern is. There is some change in your strategy or your operations that have occurred in the last, I don't know, 2 years or year and a half, okay? Originally, I thought, oh, it's the Pioneer Park reassignment of officers. But, you know, you claim it's not. You claim that we have less crime up on the East Bench than we ever had. I don't know, my ear to the ground, I'm hearing a lot more, and I think a lot of these people are hearing the same and having the same experience. I've lived here for 30 years on the East Bench, and there is no question that the amount of crime has gone up. Regardless of, regardless of what your statistics say, we may be a hotbed. You dispute that, okay? But I dispute your feeling about it or your numbers because there's too many people and we're having too many reports among ourselves. But the thing that really bothers me is that we don't get response. There's been 4 occasions of my neighbors and myself where we have called and there has been no response.
Okay, so let me tell you this. That is not the case, right? And I can pull it up. Like I said, I am happy. I will pull up. You tell me what numbers they are. I will tell you when they got there, what they did, and everything else. I have the ability to do that. And if somebody is not responding to you, somebody's going to lose their job in my organization. They absolutely should. Okay, so hand me your letter if it's got those numbers on it, and I would be happy to look at those specifically and say, yes, here somebody did respond. Or if nobody did respond, somebody is going to be standing tall and answering why they didn't show up when they got dispatched. Things don't disappear. I mean, that's the beauty of computer age. Comes in, it's logged into the computer. If it doesn't, if nothing resolves it, it still sits in the computer forever. And so we can pinpoint exactly when they were there, what they did, right? To the second. Even the radio traffic that took place and the calls that took place. So I'm happy to look at those. I'm not being argumentative with you. It's a little passion that comes up.
You said you didn't want to be argumentative, and I don't want to either, so I'm going to try and stick to the facts, okay?
No.
Your observations.
Happy to look at them.
Yeah, and it's just, it does not jive with what we are seeing.
Like I said, I will look at any case or any situation or residents and find out exactly what's going on.
Okay, so the next question right behind Jerry. Jerry, can you hand him the microphone? Thank you, sir.
I was an Army officer in emergency management, and every time that comment was in that message center, you need a message center officer that goes back after that first and reiterates that sort of thing. I'll get out.
Oh, no, absolutely. I don't disagree with it. I mean, like I say, he just told me about this going on. I'm happy to go back and say, all right, what's going on?
Check that message center because a lot of times they'll send that out, and if nothing happens, you still have an ambulance waiting to get his tire fixed 10 years down the line. So
Okay. Do I get to?
Does the gentleman next to you have a question? I know that oh, you don't? Okay. All right, Kelly.
Okay.
All right. Okay. I'll stick around as long as y'all want me to.
So, I'm Kelly Marinan. I live in Yale Crest. Thanks, Chief, for being here. This feeling of a trend that seems to be increasing, it does seem like it. Working from home, I've witnessed one drug deal that I didn't realize was a drug deal until, a few minutes later. And I've witnessed a package being stolen off the porch of a house at the same time as another neighbor witnessed it. We both were eyewitnesses. One texted, and I called the cops to report it. And we got a response. It was fine, perfect. We didn't expect anyone right away. But it tends to be on our block that what's happening is small, and it doesn't get called in, it doesn't get reported. But it does seem like an increase. I was talking to one neighbor standing outside talking about the theft of packages, because we started picking up packages for each other and putting them in a safe spot. And we saw a bicycle come by, and I said to him, that guy doesn't belong. And he's like, well, he's just a biker. And I'm like, mountain bikers coming off the shoreline trail don't wear their backpacks that loose. And plus, look at his head, left, right, like it really was casing. But the thing that alarms me even more, because like I say, I think things are getting bolder, is just Tuesday night and a couple weeks ago also, I see people, they're not at Pioneer Park, they're like a couple blocks south of the City County building, and one was at an intersection of 17th South and State Street, where you see two guys, a really young guy that looks, totally like a regular person, an older person, and you see a quick exchange, you see them grab, maybe they run 6 steps away and they inject into their veins in public. I mean, blatant, right out there. They don't even run and hide to do this. So I think there's a real increase in the drug stuff going on.
No question about it. The drug things, if we want to talk heroin, is off the charts.
Do you want calls on that?
Absolutely. Those are difficult to deal with, but heroin has become a tremendous epidemic in the United States. In fact, we have overdoses. It's unbelievable.
And I think that's what's happening in the neighborhood.
And Utah leads out on this, by the way, just so you know, because we saw the prescription problem with Oxycontin, oxycodone earlier than anyone in the nation. In fact, the last 3 years in the state of Utah, overdose deaths from prescription medication has outpaced traffic accident deaths. And now what's happened is we said, oh, there's a problem with prescription medication. Doctors stopped prescribing as much. We all started throwing it away or giving it to the police department to dispose of. Oxycontin rose to $80 a tablet on the street. You hit heroin for $10 a chip, and it's a very similar high. It's a very dangerous high, and we're seeing all kinds of overdoses and everything else. We need to... Supply is not going to solve that problem. We need to talk about the education side of this house, because there are so many people. There are drug cartels on wires who are saying, do not sell anything but heroin because we're making so much money. We used to be 4 or 5 steps removed from major drug cartels. We're now 2 steps removed because there is so much profit to bring heroin into the United States now. That is the problem of the future for the United States. It's a very scary one.
We need the state legislatures to give us some health care, mental health things.
Well, I'll be really quick about this, but the one thing that we've done is we've incarcerated people with drug and alcohol problems for years and years and years and hasn't solved it, right? Until we educate people, the only thing that we've been successful is cigarettes, right? We educated. Telling a young person that you're going to go to jail or the cops are going to write you a ticket for tobacco has never dissuaded anyone from using cigarettes. Right? But the messaging about the risks, the consequences associated have. And those are the discussions we're not having with drugs. They work. There's no question you get high when you take heroin. Right? But we need to talk about the risk to society and the risk to the individual and have them choose an alternative. Because, boy, we could put billions of dollars into supply. These places are bigger than Walmart, the drug cartels that are making money. We take off 30 pounds, which translates into $10 million 2 months ago. That doesn't even cause heroin to blip as far as the price in Salt Lake City. So it is very scary. I mean, that's a problem for the future.
So I'm just counting one more question. Are there any other questions? Okay, so ma'am, you can, oh, there are, okay. So no, go ahead and ask your question. And then we'll come back to you, ma'am.
So coming back to the issue of burglary and treatment by the police force after the fact, this is more, I guess my first thing is more of a suggestion rather than a question. So I asked after this event if there could have possibly been traffic footage, because there was some of our neighbors did see a vehicle parked outside our house when we were not there at a certain point in time, and they saw someone approach the house. And when I asked the detective, I was told that the UDOT cameras that are on Foothill don't really record, or they don't have the capacity to zoom in to license plates numbers, and so that's a dead end. And so one suggestion is, would it, given that the police, to actually employ a human being to do patrols is so expensive, would it be a cheaper option to enable these UDOT cameras to, or at least replace them with something that can zoom in? And that might be one mechanism to prevent and monitor, perhaps. The second thing is that evidently, once a case has passed on to the status of an inactive case, then even if an item that was stolen gets back into the pawn database, there's no way for that to get into the detectives'
No, absolutely
purview.
there is. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That is entered onto NCIC, the National Criminal Incident Database. It lasts forever until we take it off.
No, but does the detective who had been handling this case get to know about it? Will
Yes.
there be then I can show you emails from the detective that say that the system doesn't work that way.
Well, so if I put, it's like the saw, right? If I can't put on a criminal database that a saw was stolen, right? But if I have a serial number for this DeWalt saw, that's entered into the NCIC database, and then that resides in there until we choose to take it off. And so if there's a hit anywhere in the United States on that, it comes back to Salt Lake City, we get a tickler that says, hey, one of your items is in wherever, right? We encountered it. Any officer who looks in the back of a truck and says, I think that's stolen, and runs it anywhere in the United States, right? Puts the serial number on the database, just like a person, it comes back and says, that's a stolen saw out of Salt Lake City.
But her jewelry was hard to identify.
That is, yes, I won't disagree with you, right? And I have been victimized with jewelry as well. And and that's the challenge in a pawn shop or everything else, to identify that. I mean, serial numbers are one thing. Pictures do help, but those are very difficult to have results. But as best we can, we track those types of things and keep track of them. And they're entered into a database that exists. It's the exact same database.
Mm-hmm. Would you also comment on the cameras and the possibility of having better cameras
Yes.
at major intersections?
So the cameras are not run by Salt Lake City. They're run by the Department of Transportation for the state. And there's a big controversy because they will not let us take control of those because it's a privacy thing, right? That we can't track the movement of people and everything. Now, in the event we had a missing child, we have the ability to take those over. We can monitor them, and we use them all the time, but I can't specifically direct them to record and some of those other things that we would do. Now, we set up our own cameras all the time that we, for different reasons, and we put on a street, and sometimes we identify them that, hey, there's now a camera in the area, and sometimes we don't, just depending on the circumstances.
How many cameras are there in the Salt Lake City area?
Oh, owned by me? Very few. We are not in the camera business. I mean, we have a handful. We have 4 in Pioneer Park, and we have a dozen or so that we randomly move around for different purposes, but we don't have any fixed cameras. I mean, we have access to those traffic cameras and stuff, but there's privacy issues there that are a big discussion.
The difficulty with cameras, you have the privacy issue, but then you also have the constitutional amendment against improper search and seizure. And there are cases all over the country where cities, police departments lose those because of that constitutional amendment. So it's the technology. Just because the technology's there, there are constitutional requirements that the department has to follow, that the city has to follow. I met with a vendor yesterday on this issue, or on Tuesday, I guess. And you know, there's some really cool technology out there. It's just, we have to be very, very careful not to cross that line, because as technology improves and as it gets better, the easier it is to go further than it should. So
those cameras on the traffic, on the freeways and stuff, can't point into private space.
Yep.
You also politically, in 1984, you cut a deal with
Yes.
Okay, so I think we have one more. Thank you for your questions. Ma'am?
One more, please.
I wanted to ask a question about kids and drugs, just piggybacking on the lady's question. I heard about in some high schools in the Valley that kids use drugs.
Yes.
Okay, so is there anything the police can do, the school can do, any kind of intervention? I mean, as a parent, I mean, in the future when my son goes to middle school, high school, like as a parent, how should we deal with it?
So I will tell you, I am the father of 4, 3 of which are now grown, thankfully, and I have been very frank in my discussions with them. And I tell them, this is what drugs are, this is what they do to your body, and yes, they absolutely work, and oh, by the way, let's go down to Pioneer Park and look at some of these people, and this is the consequence of using some of those drugs. Look at what it does to your body, right? Look at what it does to your lifestyle. Look at what it will potentially do to your family. We need to have these frank conversations. Our community, right, we tend to take the notion that if we don't tell them about it, they won't know. If you don't talk to your children about drugs, they are going to hear it in high school. It is in every single high school. It doesn't matter if it's private school or not. Every single high school has some sort of drug presence. You talk to your kids about it. You be open. This is what it does. This is what it looks like. And you have some very scary conversations with your children, especially if you have daughters. Never take a drink from somebody you don't know. If you are at a party, if you're with your friends, you never set your Coke down on the sidewalk and walk away and then come back and drink out of it. Those are the kinds of things. Again, you talk paranoid, but you're talking to a police chief here. You got to tell your kids about what goes on, and you have to be honest and frank with them, because someone else will have that discussion, and you don't want their friends to have it, and you don't want the local high school drug dealer to have that conversation with them. So you need to be very upfront and frank with them in order to prevent this. Education, education, education. I have never been the scary threat that's going to stop someone from using drugs. You and your relationship with your kids have a much better chance than I ever will coming in and saying, boy, I'm going to take you to jail if you use drugs. Has that ever deterred anybody? Let's look at Colorado and what's going on in the rest of the nation. Not going to happen. So have those conversations and be very frank and honest with them. Look at what happens to you if you use this.
I'm going to jump in onto this one too, because I have a personal experience that I just popped up a couple of months ago. My daughter is a freshman at Highland. She's a great kid. We have a really good relationship. She is starting to think that I'm pretty stupid, but she still thinks that I'm not quite that dumb yet, but
she's not driving yet, obviously.
But it's starting. No, it's starting, and every day it's getting a little bit more. But she told me, just matter of fact, she's like, Dad, we have, I hear kids all the time that talk about, cutting class and going over to Sugar House Park and smoking pot or getting high on something else. And as open as I've been with my daughter, it still shocked me, because you don't think that that's going to happen. And I mean, I'm very fortunate because she told me about it. We've talked about this stuff before, so it wasn't a foreign concept to her. But kids are going to be confronted with it. I went to Brighton High School way back when, and I didn't. Yeah, and I didn't, and Brighton did have a reputation, but I didn't ever, so I went through my whole high school years without ever having anyone offer drugs or anything like that. And but now I look back on it and talk to people, and I was a total anomaly. Kids are going to find out about it. Kids are going to hear about it. Kids will know know that it's going on. And I think I totally concur with what Chief Burbank is saying. Talk to your kids. As strongly as we can enforce it, it's still going to happen. And we can put kids and send them to juvie. We can arrest them and take them to detention. Do all this kind of stuff. It marks up their record. That has consequences in and of itself. Education truly is the way that we're going to have to deal with this, but it is a very unpleasant reality that we're living in. But it's one of those things that we can't enforce away. We've tried to do that, and ever since we started the war on drugs, and here we are in 2015, and heroin sales are higher in Salt Lake City than they've ever been. Heroin use is higher than it's ever been. It's going to be education, and that's something that we're going to have to look at.
I agree. At the end of the day, it's personal responsibility and family responsibility. At the same time, say if I got to know that my son's school has this issue, who do I report to? Do I report it? Or if I tell you this is a school, I want to know whether there is drug presence, is that public information?
Well, I will tell you right now, very publicly, there is not a high school in this city that does not have a drug issue of some type.
What
so
about
you need to be
elementary
aware.
School?
Elementary schools, no, not so much. Now you start to see talk about it in elementary school. It's junior high when you start to see more usage take place. But again, it's conversations. So a 10-year-old that I have tremendous interest in gets the conversation about drugs. Now, not as graphic as my 17-year-old, but you have to start having that conversation and what the risk is. One of the things, and I'll be really brief, the idea, this notion that marijuana has no impact or harm on you is floating everywhere. I talk to high schools all the time, and I will talk to your child's school or whatever, or have somebody. Right? We have a very strong lobby that wants to legalize marijuana, and we won't get into that debate. But the idea is there's no consequence. Ask any heroin user, where did you start? They're going to say marijuana. Now, that doesn't mean that marijuana users are all going to be heroin addicts, right? That is not the connection I'm trying to make. But it absolutely has some consequence and some risk associated with it that if that's the choice you and your family decide to make an informed choice. Right? And know that you might be the one that leads you down that path.
But to your question, should you report it to the school? Absolutely. I would report it to the school. I would report it to the school resource officer if it's in high school or junior high. And I tell people all the time, do not hesitate. If you have a question, if you're wondering whether or not you should call the police, call the police. Don't call 911, but call the 799-3000 number because it's always better to over-report than under-report.
Just a quick comment as a physician. For 12 years, I was on the State of Utah Doctors Diversion Panel for Division of Occupational Professional Licensing. There are ways to monitor. There are superintending things that go on confidentially without having to bring it to public record. There are ways to do any number of interventions. I was brought up, and I brought up my kid to say to her friends, same as my parents taught me, no thanks, I'm high on life. I started telling that to my kid when she was 8 years old. She started being able to quote it. Now she's a teenager, and she's, like Charlie, luckily, and his daughter, able to tell me what's going on with her and her friends in a way that I'm a safe refuge. That's what you have to do. You have to not only talk to your kids, you have to listen. And the last thing I wanted to say about heroin is that there are specific quantification drug tests for urine screens in particular that are able to also, if you ask for specificity, you can get the specific metabolite screen for heroin. So as a physician, when I'm doing a drug test, I'm not only checking to see what's there or not there, I'm also checking to see, are there drugs of potential for abuse? And I've had to write letters to some patients saying, please take care of yourself and stay alive, because heroin is a real problem, and all of us have responsibilities, not just the doctors and not just the users or abusers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very responsible.
Chief, I just want to thank you very much for taking so much time tonight. Really appreciate it.
Let me just say really briefly, the support of the police department is tremendous, and we will work. I know I kick back on things, absolutely. We will work with you to do all we can to make sure that your neighborhood is safe. And it is my neighborhood, as I said before, and I want to work with you, and I commit to you. whatever resources we can. And your support has been tremendous, and I thank you very much because you all make us better. So thank you.
And I just want to thank you all again for staying as long as you have and asking the great questions that you have. This is the kind of dialogue that I think is really important. It's one of those things that I think is important for you to have an opportunity, but honestly, most importantly, I think it's important for Chief Burbank to hear directly from the citizens of District 6 and the concerns that you have. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for bringing up the questions and concerns that you have. Chief Burbank, thank you very much. Before we leave, Detective Tim Stum, can you raise your hand? Okay, so Detective Stum is the CIU officer assigned over District 6. If you have not gotten to know Detective Stum, if you have questions or concerns, Detective Stum is a phenomenal resource that we have. He's been the officer assigned to District 6 for the past couple of months, and it's great to have him here. So he's in the back. As you leave, introduce yourself. But he's a great guy to get to know. So again, thank you all very much, and drive safely.
Train him well.